So lately I've been watching the Ken Burns documentary on the Vietnam War, and the Vietnam War is a subject that I'm really interested in, and it's a subject I have quite a big background in. So for example, at university during my history degree, during my third year, I think about 3/4 of it was spent on Vietnam, so I did two massive modules on the Vietnam War, looking really in depth at all the issues. I also wrote my dissertation on the foreign policy of Jimmy Carter post-Vietnam, because obviously he was the first US president not involved at all with anything to do with Vietnam. So yeah, I have a big interest in it, and I really like it. And I also think people do not remember how completely devastating it was, not really on the US, because we all know how devastating it was on the US because of, our Western way of thinking. We normally think about the US casualties, we think of the protests, we think of the civil rights issues around Vietnam, but we don't really think about how many Vietnamese people died. And I think what Ken Burns does a good job of doing is showing the Vietnam War for all sides, because you even see like South Vietnamese Army, North Vietnamese Army, Viet Cong, and just civilians in Vietnam. So it's very interesting to look at it. But what I don't like, since the end of Vietnam, even though I haven't been alive, in that era, is the way people get Vietnam shamed. And what I mean by that is that if they didn't serve in Vietnam, they're seen as cowards. Even if they didn't get picked, for example, like Bill Clinton says his draft number didn't get picked, or if they don't want to go to war, they all get shamed as cowards. Now, this also applies to Donald Trump, and there's one person in particular I'm thinking of when I say this, is Cenk Uygur, the host of the Young Turks, and I'm a big fan of the Young Turks in general. I really credit it with me getting sort of interested in American politics and stuff, so it isn't like really a massive slight against him as a person. But something he often says is, calling Trump a coward and stuff, and calling him like cadet bone spurs and all these things. People say this on Twitter, and I don't really like it, because even though it's fun to dunk on Trump, and why we say it to Trump is maybe different than why you might say it to someone else, I think it helps perpetuate the myth that everyone who didn't go to Vietnam is somehow a coward because they had morals, a lot of them, or they stood up for what they believed in, or simply because they didn't want to go. Because why would you want to go to Vietnam? Why would you want to be sent by the elite in America to go fight and die for their interests and kill some of the poorest people on earth, literally for capitalism and imperialism? Why would you want to do that? Even if you don't have a strong moral, objection to the whole war, why would you personally want to go do that? So I don't really like this Vietnam shaming that people do. But I do understand why you do it to Donald Trump, for example, because, he shits on real veterans. Was it that Muslim family, remember, their son had died in the Iraq War, and Trump said awful things about them and refused to apologise. He said all this stuff about John McCain, how he likes people who weren't captured and stuff. So I can understand why people want to make fun of him. It's like, why are you calling these people cowards? Why are you saying all this stuff about them when they actually served America in some way, while you got out of the Vietnam War because you were wealthy and because you said you had bone spurs and you weren't sure what foot it was in? So I can understand that, because a narcissist like Trump is obviously shitting on real veterans, but at the same time, I don't really get holding up people like John McCain as heroes, because John McCain's dad was like the guy who oversaw the whole of the war effort in the Nixon administration. He was in charge of the whole war effort, and arguably the Nixon administration's Vietnam War was even worse than it was previously, because they bombed North Vietnamese civilians way more. Linebacker 1 and 2 literally brought North Vietnamese to its knees, so much so they had to negotiate for peace in 1973. So, that's how much destruction John McCain's dad did, and John McCain obviously volunteered for this because it's in his family, and he bombed people as well. And I don't, like that side of it either. John McCain is a hero. But at the same time, I don't like people who didn't go being called cowards. Because if you read someone like Tim O'Brien, who seriously considered running away, he wrote a lot about his experience in Vietnam. He was a young guy, I think he's from Minnesota, and he went to a hotel and he's prepared to fly to Sweden to avoid the draft. And he was seriously considering it. And the last second he turned back and he went and joined the army instead. And what he talks about is the immense societal pressure to join the army and fight in Vietnam, especially in small towns like where he grew up. He said, his friends and stuff went to college, and a couple of them got picked for the draft and a couple of them didn't. And you just had to go, because if you didn't go, you'd seriously be shunned by your community. You couldn't show your face there anymore because you'd be seen as a coward. And I respect people immensely who didn't go based on principle, or who didn't go based on their own personal, I don't want to die. I don't want to go join the army. I don't want to kill people. So I'm not going to go. Because there was so much pressure to go. And, so many people served in the military during the Vietnam War era. And when you watch the Ken Burns documentary, you see how brainwashed a lot of these people are, like thinking how great a cause it is. Lots of people volunteer, when they're like 17, and they go and they really want to fight, and they just see how awful this combat is and how awful America treats the Vietnamese and, that essentially the bad guys in this war. And you obviously feel very bad for them, but at the same time, could you make the argument that it's easier to go along with the crowd and all join the army than stand up for what you believe in? Stand up to, I guess, the silent majority, the people who voted Nixon in twice, the people who think you're a traitor to America, you're a communist, like the Johnson and Nixon administrations fought the anti-war protesters were, like literally working for Moscow and stuff. So I got a lot of respect for them, even the people who did it for, selfish reasons. Because if the draft came in England, if there was some sort of war like that, I'd definitely not go. I'd definitely not go based on principle, and I'd definitely not go based on my personal objections to it, because I don't want to die and I don't want to kill people. And I wouldn't want to go because most wars, nearly every war in history, has been fought for selfish reasons of a country or imperialist reason. And I wouldn't want to be a part of that. And I respect a lot of people who went. And you see in Tim O'Brien's book, If I Die in a Combat Zone, how hard it was for people to run away to places like Sweden or Canada. And people like Jimmy Carter tried to bring in legislation to allow these people to come back, because if they came back they'd face trouble with the law, because it was obviously illegal to dodge the draft. And, I just don't like shaming people for not going, whether that's Bill Clinton, whether that's Donald Trump. Even though we hate Trump, even though we hate the way he talks about veterans, even though a lot of veterans seem to not care because they support Trump, because there's so many things to criticise Trump on, I think it's a bit of a low blow to say, yeah, he got out of Vietnam. Because I'm pretty sure nowadays, knowing what we know about the war, and if there was a draft again in America or in England, most of us wouldn't want to go, and most of us would see it was bullshit. So I don't really, want to criticise people for not going too bad, because obviously George Bush Jr. didn't go either, and he got out of it because I think that is the main problem. They had rich daddies who could get them out of the war, whereas so many black people, so many minority people went and died for a country that hated them. So I guess that's the hypocrisy, but at the same time, maybe criticise the elitism of these people, rather than, they didn't go fight an imperialist war. Because like I'm saying, the whole thing really just perpetrates the myth that people who didn't go to Vietnam were cowards and traitors, and I don't really like that. And if we have to not criticise Trump for one thing, not going to Vietnam, I think we'll survive because he's just done so much shit. It's not really relevant, and I don't think we should really bring it up anymore, because I just don't personally like perpetrating this myth and stereotype about people who didn't go to the war. So anyway, let me know what you think about this issue. I know a lot of my subscribers actually have direct relation to the war, in terms of like you had family members serving. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Like the video and subscribe to the channel if you're new. If you want to find me on social media, follow me at The Tabernacle on both Twitter and Instagram. I also have a Patreon now, and I'm really just trying to get funding for a new setup, because I know a lot of you said, this isn't very professional, I need a mic, I need a better background. So I have a Patreon to try and raise money for a lot of these things. And a lot of you have been really kind and donated to me in live streams, and a lot of you have donated to Patreon. So go check that out if you want to support my content. I also have a WordPress blog where I write some stuff. That's just The Tabernacle WordPress. And if you made it this far, thank you for watching.